But when we are showing these projects to you, you're going to notice a regular pattern. Research is playing a huge part. But all of them are design projects, right? Like, you know, so at the end of the day, there's always a design proposal, but the design proposal is coming in a way that is research by design. So it's a research process, but it's a research process by design. Okay, take this down. Research by design. Note this. This is an official name of a method, actually. Research by design process. And in here with Haliç, you know, you guys know it was a competition last year held by Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality, and they divided the site into 7 areas. And we were working on the first area. But of course, you know, when you think of Haliç, when you think of this natural system, it's impossible to just like localize it into one area, because Haliç does not work in small pieces. It's an entire system, okay, that is coming from the rivers and it goes until the seawater. And Haliç is actually a geographical term, right? It's an estuary. In English, Haliç is an estuary, okay? So, but at the same time, you know, it has an immense importance for Istanbul. So now I'm going to be explaining you a little bit about the process and a little bit about the project, because both are very related with each other. So we started actually, you know, the design process by of course, research. And when you look at Haliç, you know, it's the area, like it's like a natural port, okay? And this natural port, it was like very protected. It was very much protected from the wind. It was protected from the high water levels, or like from the tides and the waves. But at the same time, it was very protected from the enemies, right? Like from any kind of attack. So all of a sudden then, you know, it's creating the capital, like the Byzantium's capital is over here, and they are using Haliç as a port area. And this natural port then is creating the civilizations that are to come. And it's creating this, you know, like for throughout the history, it's turning Haliç into an area where there is, you know, like at the end of the day, it's a piece of geography. It's a very unique piece of geography where the 2 rivers are coming and it's opening up and it's leading towards the big waters, okay? And it's a very unique geographical situation. And that unique geography creating the port, then it's becoming a global point, right? Because a port is working with the entire earth. Like, you know, you're transferring goods and people from one city to another through the ports. So it's becoming this place where lots of cultures, lots of languages, like historically are coming together, different economies are coming together, different goods are coming together and are being traded. And it's creating a really multi-layered and still growing urban fabric, which we can still see today. And then in 20th century, this natural port, which was in the Byzantine time and in the Ottoman time, that was used like a trade port, this time in 20th century, it's turning into an industrial port. So this is a quite unfortunate decision, you know, of the time. But, you know, with the industrialization of the world, Turkey is also being industrialized, and the industrialization, they need the port, they need production, and all of a sudden they are using this natural port as an industrial port. And later at the end of the 80s, of course, this industrialization, by the way, is causing a lot of pollution issues, You guys are young and you don't remember, but when I was a kid, when we were passing around Haliç, everyone was like covering their noses. It was impossible to breathe the air. Like it was so polluted. It was so smelly and so dirty. And what's happening is that, you know, at the end of the 80s, they start removing the industry from Haliç, and they take it to İkitelli, organize sanayi area. So what happens is that, you know, all of the industrial buildings were located on the shore. And when they remove the industrial buildings, all of a sudden there's a discontinuity in the fabric. So what you see in here are the leftover spaces, you know, from this is the current image of Haliç today. And what you see is this discontinued fabric that, you know, the inland and the water, they don't touch each other. They don't work with each other together, you know. So there's like a disconnection. There's not really a relationship in between the two. And so to really understand, and this is a key thing to everybody, to really understand the place, we wanted to listen to it, right? Imagine yourself like you're a doctor, okay? And you're going to diagnose the problem, right? What do you do as a doctor? You listen to the patient, right? Like the patient is telling you the story. Then you ask for x-rays. You ask for blood analysis. You know, you gather all the data before being able to put a diagnosis. That's why research is so important. So what we wanted to do, we wanted to listen and we wanted to like really examine what was going on in Haliç. We looked at therefore like lots of historic data through historic maps, through historic miniatures, depictions. We were checking the stories that like what happened historically over here. We have tried to gather like an archive of the old photos, the old imagery, how the area changed. We tried to gather like the historic data about the environmental situation. How was the flora and fauna before? How was it, you know, how did it affect, how was it affected with the industrialization? How is it right now? Like transportation data, environmental data, a lot of data. We have gathered, like, I mean, we looked at so many things. And then what we did, we took all of that data, okay, and we mapped them on the space. So because we were working on the first site, this is the boundaries of the first site, but of course, Haliç is so much larger. We got all that data that we have learned, that we have researched, and we tried to map them on the cartographic space. And as we were bringing them on the map, we started seeing things that are not so easily visible and seeable, okay? And the one thing that came out, the most important thing, is that since the Byzantine times and through the Ottoman times and still kind of continuing today, there is an urban fabric that is based on a framework. And this framework is called street, gate, pier. Sokak, kapı, iskele, okay? So there's a street that is coming down to the gate of the city wall. You get out of the gate and then there's a pier, okay, off the port. So this is the framework. So actually Haliç is full of this kind of streets that are leading to the gates. And there are lots of gates. And still when we look today, what we had seen that you look at the image that is on the left, you see the city wall, you see the gate, you see the street that is coming to the gate. And when you get out of the gate, the street turns into the pier and the pier gives way to the port. So it's still continuing actually today. But the front part, the pier part, is the broken part. Because of the 20th century industry, they have broken that part of the framework. And we thought that actually this is an area that is historically had been functioning with the water. So the land and the water were functioning together through this framework. And what we did, we wanted to recover and recuperate this framework and create then, like, you know, like we want, as you can see on the image, which is like diagram that is on the right, you're seeing all these streets that are leading towards the shore and that are, you know, creating a continuous waterfront on Haliç.
Well, one of the key factors of this, you can also see it in this axonometrics, but this framework of street, gate, pier, it was the source of everything. It was the movement of woods that it was coming from the port area, but it was also the place where water was somehow leading down. So there was this dual relationship that we didn't know, we didn't see, but when we were mapping, we were finding all the where the old deres were, like the old creeks, and where the piers were, and we started superimposing. It's a little bit referring to what we were speaking the other day about the field conditions, right? Of standalone, that there are these layers, and at the end, when you are looking at those layers superimposed on top of each other, you started seeing things. And these streets were the sources of almost every activity or every movement that was happening in the framework of Haliç. And like, so I was explaining this urban fabric that was broken at some point, and it generated this void. And of course, we as humans, the moment we see a void, we try to fill it with whatever we have of the area. It turned into this chaotic somehow. There is car parks, there is transportation systems, there is a tramway, there's like a lot of different eras and different interventions happening in a super narrow space. We were working in an area from Eminonu Square to, what was the name of the last pier? I don't know. Fener. So there is no actual physical space in that part of the city. So our intervention also tried to propose to recover somehow some of that lost space to cars, to transportation, to give it back somehow to the public, trying to jump and trying to generate these platforms and these piers somehow that were recovering some of this lost space from the area of Haliç.
So as you can see, you know, like the streets are still there and they are still coming down to the water, but you know, the piers were lost. Okay, so the piers were gone. And what we did, instead of bringing the piers as piers of trade or piers of industry, we brought them as piers of socio-cultural activity. And this is how, like, you know, so each pier had a different program. And in the port, instead of like the big ships that are going around, there were these floating platforms that are being traded from one neighborhood to the other. Because as Carlos said, the area in the waterfront is very narrow and we didn't have space to put, like, for example, a sports field. Okay. And we didn't have space because it was like 4 meters of area just to walk by. So, and instead of trying to build sports fields for every neighborhood, like Fener, Eminönü, Sirkeci, you know, in between we also had Cibali, like, you know, instead of like trying to build for all of them, instead we did like one sports field floating platform that was traveling from one pier to another, and all the neighborhoods were sharing them. And just like this, we also mapped the natural systems. Okay. And when we were mapping the natural systems, you are seeing that actually, you know, it's not possible to look at Haliç only for birinci bölge, right? Like you have to, like Haliç is an overall system. That's why it's really important to zoom out and see all the water and green relationships over here. So you are seeing how the topography is moving, where are the green areas, you know, where there is, when you map the green areas, the existing green areas, you can see where there's continuity and where there's breakage on the system. So actually it's telling you how the system is supposed to be connected. It's becoming then your proposal. So when we zoomed into our site, what we had seen, again, one more time, look at this. Again, you are seeing the streets that are going down to the shore, right? So all of those streets, actually, they have on top of them small green patches. And the moment they are turned into green corridors, they are not just like carrying the people to the water, but also they are carrying the wind to the water. Because the location of the streets, the direction of the streets are according to the prevailing wind direction of Istanbul. So you see the wind direction, like very small there, drawn, and the direction of the streets are like that. What does that mean? That means that actually these streets, they have natural ventilation. And with natural ventilation, the seeds and the pollens of the green, they actually move. So we turn these streets then into green corridors that is not only carrying the people, but also carrying the air, carrying the pollens, carrying the green on top of it.
In the same way, actually, with the blue infrastructure, like we are seeing that the streets, again, were places where the old creeks and topographically, if you think about it, where the creeks are is topographically where it's a more flat area. So it makes sense that it takes less effort to build a street or to build a road in that sense. But those streets are the source of water at the same time. And this happens that when we were researching, like we are finding that when it rains a lot in Istanbul, some of the streets, they turn into rivers directly because the river is still, the topography is still in that direction and the water accumulates there. But somehow they are the arteries and the source of all the ecosystems, like natural ecosystems, like human ecosystems too, like the port idea is coming. So they became really important for us in the project.
So when you put these three different layers, right, on top of each other, what you have is a system that is still street, gate, pier, but this time is also an ecological. It has an ecological component and a sociocultural component. Previously, this street, gate, pier framework was something that belonged to the trade port. It was for trade and economic activities. Now, instead, you can use this framework, to create the sociocultural common habitat for people and ecologically welcoming also the flora and the fauna and trying to kind of recuperate the contamination that happened in the 20th century with the industrialization in Haliç. So it was like, then you see here the multi-layeredness of the system and how all the systems are coming together and working together. So you can see in here, the water is coming down with bioswales and water filtration areas. Then you have these green patches, which are leading together, turning into green corridors and becoming bigger green areas on the waterfront. At the same time, you have these piers that are coming from the streets and leading to the water, creating this connection between the water and the land, socioculturally with different programs. And here, these are other ecological strategies. I'm not going to go so much into detail of them right now, but if you have any questions, if you later check the project and if you have very specific question about the ecological interventions, we can always talk about them. And as you see, right now with the floating platforms also, and with the pier, with the idea of the port, in a port, things are moving on the water. So right now the programs are moving on the water. And right now you have this dual conversation of land and water, right? And all of a sudden, it creates a continuous front where there is not a lot of space. But as you can see, all of these maps that we have done, and this is the transportation data map, for example. Here we are seeing how busy transportation there is right now and how much of an area is actually lost to the vehicles that are on the water and people don't have really access to. So it's really the place where not for people, but actually for the sea vehicles, transportation vehicles. And we also try to, gather them with the piers too into some locations so that the majority of the shoreline will be accessible to people.
This, for example, there are some of the transportation decisions that we took in the area, pedestrianizing some of the areas or making Eminonu Square fully pedestrian. But it's really key for you guys to understand that we cannot go to those decisions, or we cannot read the analogy of the patient and the doctor if we don't know how the transportation system is actually working.
If we don't do the mapping.
Exactly. If we don't do the research, if we don't see how many boats are parking in the area or how many cars are passing each day, what is the speed of the cars, what is the main routes, what is the area that is pedestrianizable or is more pedestrianized today? We are not able to take the correct decisions afterwards of how to intervene in the space. So that's why using research and mapping that research and giving it a location and a specific map to it, it becomes really powerful later to somehow take the correct decisions to the space. For example, here you can see that we pedestrianize the entire Eminonu Square, making a tunnel underneath because still there has to be some traffic Like even if we want the entire world pedestrianized and no cars anywhere, we still need to give access, and there are facilities that they need to be accessed by cars. The simplest is the fire truck. No, if there's a fire in one of the areas, the truck has to pass. So all this, we have a lot of layers. This layer, for example, was the urban memory, that we looked at poems, literature, books, old photos, depictions, like all the stories that compose somehow the narrative of the entire project were set.
But actually, we try to put them into the space, right? Like, because when you try to put those stories and like, literature and the poems into space, what happens is that as programs, they come back, right? Like, so there used to be a Bostan and we tried to bring that Bostan back, or there used to be some kind of activities in the hanlar that the çıraklar were staying upstairs and downstairs was usta, whatever. So we try to bring that right now with today's technology, creating these kuluchka, incubator areas, where there's still apprentices and usta, but this time with the help of robotics and so on. So all of these kind of data actually is giving you, like, you really listen, you really understand the patient, and then it's really like, then the diagnosis that you're putting is actually very parallel and is actually according to what the needs are. That's why the research is becoming really important in what we are doing, because we are not like going, okay, Haliç, and right now as Zuhal and Carlos, what kind of artistic stuff we should bring to Haliç, from our own desires, so that's a different take on, like our approach is a little research based, because of this. So it's you can, and the similar pattern, repeats in other projects as well. But I think, when you're working on urban scale, when you're working for the city, you're not, just working for yourself. You're actually trying to say something for mass society. And at that point, your selfish wants and needs are, they have to become a little humble maybe, and you need to really understand, the needs and of the society, but always questioning creatively. So these are the floating platforms that we have spoken about. We didn't build beaches and sports areas everywhere. Instead, there was no space. So instead, we created floating platforms that are like moving from one location to the other and to be shared. And, collectively, as you can see, when all of these layers came together as the plan, all of them came together and they're working together. And here you can see the movement of people, the circulation, how it's working. You can see the movement of nature. You can see the movement of water, or the rainwater harvesting. And you can still read here that there are those streets that are leading down to the water shoreline, and there are those piers that are actually, creating this interactive relationship with the water. And we also had a digital interaction layer where the public were observing how much rainwater fell, for example, like how much rainwater was harvested, or, where are the sport, like which floating platform is going to be located to which pier, like that people can vote and can decide, their own behaviors in the space. So it was a project like this that is questioning, again, the role of the designer, kind of like trying to understand what Haliç was, what Haliç can be, what its past can say for its future also. It's a place with a lot of existing layers, but how to transform those existing layers for its future, and kind of like keeping it open so that it can continue evolving with the city, with the ecology, with the social cultural activities. So it was an eco-political project like this. All right.
We always make it very long, but just one final note for you, and probably you understood a little bit the graphic narrative, right? That we are kind of obsessed with this graphic narrative, but you can see how, for example, the early research that we did, looking at these percentage maps, looking at the old miniatures, looking at the old imagery of the era, it affected the way that we represented our narrative too. And it's something that you guys can think about when you are, because that somehow ties you to the place too, and makes your narrative much more understandable, because it is the history, is the research that is showing. I don't know, even which colors we selected is somehow based on that previous research that we have done. So I think that creates this, I don't know, much more relatable narrative somehow.
The visual storytelling, because you know it's that layer of color or the layer of depiction is also another layer of information. You're trying to tell what kind of an atmosphere that is. And in a miniature or in an engraving or in percentage maps, there's an atmosphere that about Haliç, about Istanbul, that is very beautifully grasped. And when that's becoming part of your visual storytelling as well, you're keeping that layer of information about what kind of an atmosphere it is. So that's also a small note. Okay, any questions? We made it longer than 15 minutes. No question?
I have a question, actually.
Yes,
my question is about the floating sports area, actually. You said that you made these designs for the people to use it, but when the sport area starts to move, isn't that make that place more private, like more specific? Like you're not actually always reaching that areas, because when it's in the water, it's going to in the other pier, it becomes more private area. So,
but it's like 10 minutes from so the reason the waterfront there is like 7 meters to 4 meters width, so it's only enough space to put a walking and a biking path, but there was not space to place a sports field, for example. So what we did, we had the piers, okay, which the floating platforms come and they plug on the piers, but they are always on the piers, actually on the water next to the piers, so you can always access them to the piers. But we didn't create 7-8 sports fields like that. Instead, we created one, so the Cibali and Fener, so it moves from Cibali to Fener, but that movement is like 10 to 15 minutes maybe. So it's not really like, it's not there out in the water and only some like elite people can use it. It's not like that. You can always reach them. Just when they're in motion, they are in motion, but you also decide through the app in this project proposal, you decide if it's going to be on Fener, if it's going to be on Cibali, or if it's going to be in Eminönü, so you can actually vote and create demand for it. So it's really participatory in that sense, and it's really accessible.
Also, I have one more question for this proposal. What happens when the winter comes in Istanbul? Like all the windy weathers, rainy weathers, what will this design be used? Is it going to be used in winter also, like seasonal, or it will adapt? I just want to know.
So the entire water front is working with the rainwater harvest system, right? So if there's heavy rainfalls, actually it collects all the rainwater and it keeps it and it stores it for it to be used in summertime when there's not a lot of water. So that's one part of it about the change of the climate. The other thing about the climate is that, the use of the waterfront is not necessarily always about swimming inside in it, but at the same time, if you're on a floating platform, let's say you're playing basketball, this is an area, that's why it's really important that you need to know your area. Haliç is a natural port, so it's very protected from the wind. It doesn't have strong winds in winter unless you're in a high point. So if you're on the water level, you actually don't sense that. So that's why in a winter time, if it's not a rainy day and you're on the floating platform and you want to play basketball, it's okay. It doesn't have a difference than the basketball court on the side. And we had this like areas that could be used as beach, but in winter time it was like an area that you could use for fishing, for example. So they have these different uses of like the different potential uses depending on the time. But the most important thing there is the ecological value, like how in summer the place acts with no rain, but with a lot of sun, and how it acts when there's a lot of rain and no sun. So that's the kind of like thing that ecologically all projects on Earth, this is like a must, all projects on Earth need to evaluate.
Also, Istanbul is not Norway. In winter is not that harsh, like the activities that are happening. I've seen people playing basketball in Istanbul in pure winter in shorts. So.
Anyhow, yes.
Yeah, well, the weather is always great, so that's my answer, actually. Lovely.
Okay, any other questions about the research, maybe the methodology, the mapping? Have you guys seen right now how mapping can be important? Without mapping is like the x-ray, is like the blood analysis, okay? Before being able to diagnose any kind of medicine, the doctor needs to know, right? That's why mapping is so important. That's why research is so important, all right? And, it's finding that data. So you're doing lots of readings, you're finding statistical data, but if you don't put it on the map, you don't know where spatially is happening. Okay, mekansallaştırmak, bilgiyi mekansallaştırıyoruz haritalama yaptığımızda. Çok önemli. So hopefully this is, and all of those maps later, there were like different maps, but we put all of those maps one on top of another, and that created the project with the proposals, okay?